May 25th, 2019, AEW's very first pay-per-view. Double or Nothing. A company that signed some of the best wrestlers in the world, built a show around them, and was about to find out if any of it was going to work. The main event ends. Chris Jericho is the inaugural AEW World Champion. And then, before the show goes off air, a figure appears through the crowd. Nobody knows who it is at first, and then they do. Jon Moxley, formerly Dean Ambrose, looking like a man who had just been let out of a cage and was deciding what to do with that freedom. He attacks Chris Jericho, he attacks Kenny Omega, he stands in the ring alone. That is the first image of Jon Moxley in AEW. Here's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about this story. 7 years later, 4 world championships later, a sobriety story later, the Blackpool Combat Club later, the Death Riders later, he is still here. Still the Continental Champion, still the most reliable constant in a company that has been anything but constant. I want to ask you something before we get into this. What does it mean to be indispensable? Not the best, not the most popular, not the one with the most merchandise sales, or the most viral moments. Indispensable. The one whose absence would fundamentally change what the company is. Because that is the argument I want to make about Jon Moxley today. He is not AEW's flashiest performer, he's not the one with the most technically perfect matches, and he's not always champion. But every single time AEW needed someone, when the title needed a holder, when the locker room needed a leader, when the company needed a spine, the answer has always been the same: Jon Moxley. This is the story of how that happened. Before Jon Moxley existed in AEW, there was Dean Ambrose. Jonathan Good, born 1985, Connecticut, Ohio. Public housing. A childhood that gave him, by his own account, very little except a reason to want something better. He found wrestling. He found that he was good at it. And he spent 7 years on the independent circuit, particularly Combat Zone Wrestling, where he was a legitimate deathmatch specialist. Before WWE signed him in 2011 and renamed him Dean Ambrose. I want to be honest about the Dean Ambrose era because I think people get it slightly wrong in both directions. Dean Ambrose was good. He was very good. The Shield, alongside Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, is one of the greatest factions in wrestling history. They debuted at Survivor Series 2012 and dominated for nearly 2 years. Within the Shield, Ambrose was the wild card, the unpredictable one, the glue that held the danger together. After the Shield split in 2014, after Rollins betrayed them, Ambrose had a singles run that produced genuinely great work. The Rollins feud, the first WWE Championship, 3 Intercontinental titles, Grand Slam champion. On paper, a successful 8-year career. But that is not the whole story. In May 2019, 4 days before his AEW debut, he sat at a kitchen table and recorded a podcast with Chris Jericho. He described his final years in the WWE. The scripts, the props, 6 years of walking into Vince McMahon's office to explain why wearing a surgical masks to the ring was a stupid idea and being told to do it anyways. He described being physically sick before shows, looking up symptoms on WebMD because he could not understand why he felt so bad all the time. He described counting days on his phone before his contract expired. 12 more Raws left. Okay, I can get through 12 more Raw. He turned down the contract extension. They offered him more money. He said, "I don't care how many zeros you put on a piece of paper. I am gone." His final WWE match paid him $500, appearance money. He left, and sitting at this kitchen table 4 days before the rest of his career began, he said, "I feel like the weight of the world has been lifted off my shoulders." Here is what I want you to hold on to from this chapter. Dean Ambrose was not going to become the guy in WWE. The machine was never going to let him. Jon Moxley was going to become the guy somewhere else. And AEW is the place where he got to find out what that looks like. Fans want Dean Ambrose back for a Shield reunion. I get it, the Shield is one of the greatest wrestling factions of all time, and that nostalgia is real. But what they're asking for, without knowing it, is the version of this man who was counting down days until he could leave. The caged version. The free version is what we have now. Okay, May 25th, 2019. Back to the beginning. AEW's first pay-per-view. The company had not proven anything yet, and Jon Moxley appeared through the crowd and stood in the ring alone, and the wrestling world erupted. He had already signed with New Japan Pro Wrestling, won the IWGP United States Championship in his first match there, already proving that this free version of himself worked everywhere. So when he appeared at Double or Nothing, he was not coming in cold. He was coming in as a man who was already becoming someone. And then AEW gave him the championship. February 29, 2020, Revolution. Jon Moxley defeated Chris Jericho to become the second world champion in AEW history. And then the world stopped. COVID, March 2020. The Daily's Place era. Empty warehouses, AEW running television to nobody but a camera. Jon Moxley was the AEW champion for 267 days. Most of that time was spent in front of nobody. I want you to think about what that means. The championship, the biggest prize in a new company, held by a man defending it in front of empty seats on a show, fighting just to keep going through the strangest period in recent wrestling history. He showed up every time. He worked those empty arenas with the same intensity as a sold-out pay-per-view. He defended the title against the late great Mr. Brody Lee, against Brian Cage, against Maxwell Jacob Friedman. He carried the company through the hardest period of AEW's existence and never once let it feel small. There is a version of those 267 days that could have felt like a wasted reign. It did not feel wasted. It felt like proof. And the wrestlers who watched him work those shows in front of nobody, who saw how he showed up week after week when there was no crowd to feed off of, no atmosphere to borrow from, they noticed. In a locker room of people trying to build something from the ground up, the way a man performs when nobody is watching tells you everything about who he actually is. Moxley was building that reputation in an empty room, and everyone in that building knew it. And then winter is coming. December 2nd, 2020. A special episode of Dynamite, Moxley vs. Omega for the AEW World Championship. Don Callis interfered, Omega won the title. This was the first time Jon Moxley lost in AEW. His first singles loss in the company he had helped build from the very first show. And I keep coming back to what that loss meant, because Moxley's loss is what made Omega's championship feel real. It gave the rivalry a weight it would not have if Moxley simply kept winning. A rival who wins tells half the story. The exploding barbed wire death match. The ending is famous for reasons that had nothing to do with the match itself. The pyrotechnics failed. It became a meme almost instantly. But here's what I think gets lost in that conversation. AEW swung. They swung on an idea, a death match with actual explosives built into the ring. It was the kind of ambition that only a young company with something to prove would attempt. It did not land the way they intended, but the match itself, everything leading up to that ending was brutal and earned. And Moxley, even in a match that became a punchline, delivered. The Omega feud is AEW's first iconic rivalry, and Moxley on the other side of every moment of it. The victories, the losses, the things that worked, the things that didn't. The measure of a main event presence is not how many matches you win. It is how many of the biggest matches in company history have your name on them. In AEW's early years, almost all of them did. Halloween 2021. This is the part of the story that I think matters more than any championship. October 31st, 2021, Des Moines, Iowa. Jon Moxley woke up hungover. He had been drinking almost every single day for more than 2 years, often to excess. He described it as a never-ending cycle of hell, the kind where you drink to function, where you are afraid to stop because you have Googled the symptoms of withdrawal, and they include seizures and cardiac arrest and death. He described going to television tapings and shaking, hoping nobody would notice. He was trying to manage it alone. He did not want to let anybody down. He had matches to get to, pay-per-view events to show up for. He had a daughter, Nora, 3 months old at the time, and was trying to understand what it means to be a father through all of that. Halloween night, he called an inpatient rehabilitation center while giving out candy to trick-or-treaters. He checked in that same night. His wife Renee told AEW. Tony Khan made a public announcement with Moxley's permission that he had entered a treatment program. And here's the part of the story that tells you everything about what kind of place AEW is and what kind of relationship they have with Jon Moxley. Tony Khan's response was, if you never came back, that would have been cool. Not, we need you back by this date. Not, we have pay-per-views to fill. If you never came back, that would have been cool. 3 months later, Moxley came back. Not because he was pressured. He said, I just went, well, I guess I should probably come back now. He came back in better physical condition than he had been in years. He cut a promo that night. That was one of the most honest things I have ever heard on a wrestling program. He described what he had been through, he described coming through it, and the locker room received him like a man coming home. I think about that sequence of events a lot. He was honest with his company. He was vulnerable. They supported him without conditions. He came back when he was ready, not when they needed him. That is not how corporations treat assets. That is how people treat each other. January 2022. Moxley returns and begins a feud with Bryan Danielson, a man he had history with going all the way back to when they were both in the indies, long before either of them was in a major company. At Revolution 2022, Moxley defeated Danielson. After the match, William Regal, a mentor to both of them separately, years apart, made his AEW debut. He slapped them both and forced them to shake hands. The Blackpool Combat Club. Moxley, Danielson, Wheeler Yuta, later Claudio Castagnoli, a stable built on the idea that wrestling required physical honesty and earned trust. Moxley's own words on membership, I won't stand side by side with nobody until I bleed out with them first. The philosophy of trust demonstrated through action before it is ever spoken is not a wrestling promo. It is how Moxley operated in the company from the beginning. You earn your place beside him, and he earns his place beside you. And then CM Punk. Punk had debuted in AEW in August 2021. He won the AEW World Championship at Double or Nothing 2022, and then days later suffered a foot injury and had to vacate the title. AEW ran an interim tournament. Jon Moxley won the interim AEW World Championship at Forbidden Door 2022. Punk returned, he challenged Moxley, and the confrontation that followed was one of the most genuinely compelling verbal collisions in AEW history. Moxley said he is the heart and soul of AEW. Punk called himself the dollars and the cents. Two different arguments about what mattered. Punk won the undisputed title back at All Out 2022. And then the brawlout happened. Punk's backstage altercations with the Elite, the suspicions, the title vacated, AEW in a genuine crisis of identity. Moxley had been planning to take a break. He had been running without rest for years. He had come back from rehabilitation, built the Blackpool Combat Club, done the interim championship. He was tired. He had a family at home. By any reasonable measure, he had earned the right to step away. He looked at his company in crisis and said, I'm here. Tell me what you need. The Grand Slam Tournament of Champions. Moxley entered, won it, and became a 3-time AEW World Champion. And here's what I keep coming back to about the decision. The title is the obvious part. 3-time champion. Yes, but the thing that actually matters is what it says about the relationship. He did not stay because his contract required it. He did not stay because he had nowhere else to go. He stayed because this place was his, and he was not letting it fall apart on his watch. That is not a resume achievement. That is character, and everyone in the locker room knew it. August 2024. After Bryan Danielson won the AEW World Championship from Swerve Strickland at All In, the celebration did not last long. The Blackpool Combat Club turned on him. Moxley, Castagnoli, Pac, they attacked Danielson after his championship match. Moxley put a plastic bag over Danielson's head and nearly suffocated him. Pac held back a distraught Wheeler Yuta, the man who had said he would not stand beside anyone until he bled with them first, just tried to suffocate the man he bled with the most. They renamed the group, no longer the Blackpool Combat Club, the Death Riders. October 12, 2024, Wrestle Dream. Jon Moxley defeated Bryan Danielson to win the AEW World Championship for the 4th time. The first 4-time champion in AEW history. 620 days combined as champion. Both records. I want to be honest here because I think this video has to be honest about it all. The Death Riders era was divisive. Some people felt the booking around Moxley's 4th reign leaned too heavily on interference and protection. The villain version of Moxley, cold, methodical, shielded by the group around him, was more straightforward than the complex figure he had been before. Some people found it less interesting. I do not think that changes the argument. Every long run has peaks and valleys. What matters is this. Through the face runs and the heel runs, the Blackpool Combat Club and the Death Riders, the beloved champion and the despised villain, Moxley remained the central figure of AEW television. Not by accident, not by default, but because he kept earning it. The Hangman Adam Page feud followed. Rivalry of the year 2025. Brutal, personal, Page won the title back in a Texas death match. Moxley lost the championship and he kept going. Late 2025, Jon Moxley entered the Continental Classic, a tournament to win the Continental Championship. He won. He defeated Kazuchika Okada, one of the greatest professional wrestlers alive, in the final at World's End. And when he won, something slightly different happened. He stood in the ring and thanked fans, praised his opponents, let the man underneath show through for a moment. It felt like a chapter turning. The Death Riders era behind him, something quieter beginning. He's the current AEW Continental Champion, still showing up, still defending the title consistently against Kazuchika Okada, Kyle O'Reilly, in a feud he had to finish properly after Kyle O'Reilly had made him submit twice. At Double or Nothing 2026, he won it. He made Kyle O'Reilly tap, and afterwards, still in character, still the champion, he reached down and shook Kyle O'Reilly's hand. Small gesture, but those small gestures are where the character lives. And then there is Will Ospreay. Moxley and the Death Riders attacked Ospreay at Forbidden Door 2025, put him on the shelf with a neck injury that required surgery. Ospreay was gone for months. He came back at Revolution 2026 and went directly after Moxley. They had their match, and now in one of the stranger developments of the current AEW landscape, Ospreay is training with the Death Riders, teaming with Moxley, insisting that he will never become one of them. I do not know where the story ends, but I know who is at the center of it, who has been at the center of almost every major AEW story since the night the company began. Here's what you can point to. 4 AEW championships, more than anyone in company history. 620 days as champion, more than anyone in company history. An interim championship on top of that. A 5th de facto reign that the record books do not count. The Continental title he holds today. World titles in WWE, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling. The first wrestler to hold all 3. Those are the facts, and they matter. But the strongest evidence is not the titles. It is what his peers say about him. Because lots of wrestlers win championships. Very few become indispensable. Kevin Knight, asked directly who the locker room leader is in AEW, said, "I would definitely say Jon Moxley is the #1 head guy. Everyone turns and listens to Mox whenever he has something to say, because he doesn't have much to say at all. So when he does, you better shut up and listen. He carries authority precisely because he doesn't waste it." Kyle Fletcher said, "Mox is just one of those guys that lives and breathes AEW and just wants it to succeed more than anything. He's always around, always there to offer some super cool insight that you might not normally think of." And Orange Cassidy, whose long reign as AEW International Champion was one of the best runs that the company ever had, said this, "Jon Moxley is a leader for AEW, and I think a lot of people look to Jon for leadership. No one can be Jon Moxley because there is no other Jon Moxley. I am forever in his debt for him changing and bringing out this version in me that is clearly a better version." A fellow AEW star saying Moxley's example made him better, that is not a tribute to a champion. That is a tribute to someone whose presence raises the level of everyone around him. And Tony Khan, who has been at every single AEW show since the beginning, said this about Moxley: "Jon Moxley is doing a great job backstage and has been at everything." 2 people who have been at every single AEW show since May 25th, 2019. The owner and Moxley. I want to sit with that for a moment. 7 years later, the company looks completely different. Cody Rhodes is in WWE, CM Punk is in WWE, Sting has retired, Kenny Omega has spent a lot of time injured, the championships have changed, the television deal has changed, the roster has changed, the company has changed. But go back to the final moments of Double or Nothing 2019, AEW's very first show, the night that this whole thing started. You will find Jon Moxley standing in the middle of that ring. And somehow, all these years later, through the championships and the sobriety and the stables and the crisis moments and the records and the losses and everything that made this company what it is today, he is still there. That is what indispensable looks like. AEW has always come back to Jon Moxley because Jon Moxley never left. Alright guys, this is gonna be it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was a bit more of a different video. I really wanted to go in depth into one of my personal favorite wrestlers, and I think I have with this video. You guys can follow me on Instagram at NightwakeYT if you guys want to connect with me on a more personal level. And yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.